deepened, so did the struggle within the Derg itself. On several occasions, high-ranking officers who opposed the revolution were killed in shootouts that erupted during meetings of the Derg. And Mengistu is said to have distinguished himself in these confrontations. That's how he became the leader. As Comrade Sam Marcy wrote in December 1977, the protracted armed struggle in Ethiopia was not due to senseless violence, which is what the bourgeois media was talking about, senseless violence in Ethiopia. By senseless violence, they meant the violence of the oppressors against their oppressed, the oppressed against their oppressors, not the other way around. When it was the other way around, they didn't talk about that violence. He said that, Sam Marcy said that this violence of the oppressors came from the attempt to make a transition from the democratic phase of the revolution, that is the bourgeois democratic phase, directly to the socialist revolution. And that became the aim of the Derg and the left within Ethiopia, that they could not stop at a point of just exchanging one set of rulers for another, and it wouldn't be all that different to have a bourgeois republic even, because, as I said, a lot of these feudal rulers, although they would lose a lot by losing their ownership of the land, they had already moved a lot of their wealth into other areas of the economy. So this campaign of counter-revolutionary sabotage was called the White Terror. The Derg responded by arming neighborhood organizations called Cabellis. These Cabellis were also vehicles for setting up things like cooperative stores, so people could bypass the blood-sucking merchants, for assisting women's organizations, organizing nurseries and kindergartens, classes in literacy. They were like what in Cuba was called the Committees in Defense of the Revolution. You didn't have to belong in a certain industry or anything else. If you lived in a working class area of Addis Ababa and other cities in Ethiopia, you would be a member of a Cabelli, and you could contribute to the revolution that way. I went to Ethiopia twice in 1978. I spent altogether about a month there. And I visited Cabellis that had been attacked during the White Terror. The people showed me the bullet holes in the walls of their modest offices. But after they got arms and training from the Derg, they responded with what they called the Red Terror. And as they put it, they were not going to allow a Pinochet or a Jakarta to happen in Ethiopia. They would not allow the revolution to be crushed by the reaction. Mengistu was hated in Washington and London because he acted on behalf of the oppressed masses, and also because, in his own words, not he himself, but the revolution that he was so an integral part of, had, as he put it, cut the umbilical cord to imperialism. Once he became the leader of the Derg, he closed the U.S. Air Base in Kagnu, which is in the Eritrean part of Ethiopia at that time. That air base had been used by the U.S. to spy on the USSR. Once he closed it, they tried to get one set up in Iran, and then there was a revolution going on in Iran, so they finally wound up putting it in Afghanistan. He broke diplomatic relations with Israel, and he invited the Palestine Liberation Organization to set up an office in the former Israeli embassy in Addis. He was a black African, and he knew that the imperialists wanted to divide Ethiopia from the people of neighboring Arab countries. But his actions earned the respect of progressive Palestinians and of the Egyptian left at a time when Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Kuwait, also Iran, were all involved in arming Somalia for an invasion of Ethiopia in 1977. Now, This was a period when the imperialists had decided they had to crush the Ethiopian Revolution and the Derg. And they had a coordinated offensive to do that. Where Ethiopia was fighting on three fronts. First of all, there was a landlord army headed by a group that called itself, this was really the landlords army, everybody said it was the landlords army. They called themselves the Ethiopian Democratic Union. Surprise, surprise, they didn't call themselves the blood-sucking landlords union. And they were carrying out an armed assault on Ethiopia from the northwest, which is the border with Sudan, which at that time was under a very reactionary government, and a raid against them. They were trying, to get territory and seize it, declare a government counter to the government of the Derg. Fighting against them was became known as the peasant army. It was made up of members of the military who had military training, but also some 200,000 volunteers, peasant militia volunteers, who went to the front to fight the landlord's army. When I was in Ethiopia, I visited a peasants' association out in a Ethiopia is a beautiful country, all of it, but it was out on this fantastic hillside, and they had assembled people on horseback with spears and rifles. I think there was one man there who was old enough that he had been alive at the time that the Ethiopian army confronted the Italian invaders and had been part of that struggle. And their slogan was, "Death to the landlords, we will never allow them back." That was their slogan. That was one front that the Ethiopian revolutionary government had to be prepared to fight on. Another front was in the south and east, the border with Somalia. Now, everything has been switched around since those days. At that time, actually, Somalia switched around a couple of times, but Somalia had been, it's not a small country geographically, but it has a very small population. At that time, about 3 million people. They had, the government there had called itself socialist and was getting support from the Soviet Union, aid, mainly agricultural aid, development aid, and weapons. But they were still a poor country, and what happened was the U.S. really organized a consortium of countries to bribe Somalia to attack Ethiopia. Somalia had always argued that there were 5 parts of Ethiopia, of the Somali nation, and that they would unite them one day. This was something that other countries in Africa did not do. They all had agreed at the end of the colonial period to respect the boundaries, because they felt that not to do that would create endless friction and maybe even war. But Somalia was the one country that didn't accept that, and they wanted to take part of Djibouti, a large section of Ethiopia, including the Ogaden, which is an area along near the plain, not on the Red Sea, but nearer to the Red Sea. They wanted to take Djibouti, part of Kenya, something like that. That had been their stated goal. It was even in their flag with a 5-pointed star. And the imperialists knew this, and they worked on that. And they made it known to the leadership in Somalia that if they wanted to attack Ethiopia, they could get the weapons and a lot of aid to do it. Now, this was denied by President Carter at the time. I even just recently saw on YouTube a little video of him saying, with his honest voice of a country preacher, no, we never gave any weapons to Somalia. But all the imperialists media knew it, and a lot of them even wrote about it and told exactly how they had to organize for Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, Sudan, and others to not only give a lot of weapons to Somalia, but Saudi Arabia offered $500 million in aid. Now, the gross national product of Somalia at that time was $238 million a year. It was more than 2 years' gross national product that they were dangling in front of them if they could only switch.